The whole thing blew up over a sentence in a government memo. Just one line. External Liaison Advisor M. Cordell, Independent. That was all it took. The document wasn't even stamped with our company's name, just a briefing packet circulated inside the Office of Federal Infrastructure Review ahead of a closed-door hearing. But Darren Lusk, our fresh out of Wall Street CEO, read it like I'd torched the American flag on his Peloton. He slammed the packet down like it had insulted his stock options. "I knew it," he barked, pointing at the line like it was a smoking gun. "You've been consulting on the side. With them." I didn't say anything. What was the point? Darren's the kind of guy who thinks respect is earned by being the loudest in the room and the first to say optics in every meeting. He didn't ask. He assumed. And then he fired me, right there in his corner office with the whiskey decanter he never touched and the fake plants he paid someone to water. "Conflict of interest," he declared like he was reading it off a teleprompter. "You're done here." I just nodded. No protest, no explanation. Just a quiet, surgical sentence as I stood to leave. Be sure to check your approval timeline. If you're still listening, do me one small favor. Subscribe and like the video. 97% of folks don't, and it means the world to the team. All right, back to the mess. I left my badge on his desk, walked straight past HR. They were still printing my exit packet by the time I was pulling out of the lot. 15 years. No thanks. No handshake, just a deactivated badge and an inbox already wiped by 2 p.m. I got home and fed the cat, watched the kettle boil, took a shower and scrubbed the office off me. Didn't even cry. It was like watching a building you already knew was unstable finally collapse. No surprise, no shock, just inevitability. By the time I sat down with a glass of wine, my phone lit up. "Hi, Marin, this is Greg Ellison from the agency. Just heard the news. Wanted to reach out personally. Off the record." He didn't even ask if it was true. That's the thing. They already knew. The agency knew Darren fired me before I'd even opened my severance packet. Because I wasn't consulting behind anyone's back. I was there at their request. Because no one else had spent the last decade and a half shepherding our company through enough red tape to choke a congressional committee. They'd needed me, and he'd just thrown me out like I was the janitor who'd stolen paper towels. Greg's voice was low and careful, like a man walking through a minefield barefoot. "We're reviewing next steps. We might need to pause your former company's hearing until we can assign a new liaison. You were listed as primary contact of record, Marin." I just said, "Understood." Because I had understood for months. I'd seen the writing on the wall when Darren started cleaning house. Old leadership, gone. Legal team, shuffled. Compliance VP, moved to advisory. He was building a castle out of mirrors and hoping no one noticed the foundation was made of sand. I'd stayed quiet because I thought I could keep the ship from sinking. But now, I was off the boat. And they'd thrown me overboard without even checking if I was the one patching the leaks. I didn't call anyone, didn't post on LinkedIn, didn't email the board or try to clear my name. Silence is a weapon when used right. Let them sweat. Let them find out the hard way what they just torched. By 7 p.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, no caller ID. "Mr. Lusk?" the voice said. "No," I replied, but my breath caught. Silence. Then the voice tried again. "This is Deputy Commissioner Halloran. I'm looking for Darren Lusk. We received confirmation he terminated Marin Cordell today. Just wanted to confirm that before we adjust the status on the upcoming approval hearing." My skin prickled. This wasn't rumor. This was protocol. There was a pause, and then the voice, now edged in disbelief, added, "Interesting choice. Firing the lead external advisor on the eve of a $5.1 billion approval." I leaned back in my chair and let the wine settle on my tongue. Let the words hang in the air like smoke from a fire someone else started. Darren didn't know it yet, but the train had already left the tracks. He'd built his whole empire on the illusion of control, and the first real decision he made had just lit the fuse. Tomorrow, the board would wake up to a calendar with a missing hearing. Tomorrow, legal would start combing through the liaison contracts, realizing too late that I was the named continuity officer in Section 3.4.2 of the compliance appendix. And tomorrow, well, tomorrow was when I stopped answering calls. The silence was louder than the firing. You'd think 15 years would buy you some noise. A raised voice, a dramatic email thread, a single "Are you sure?" from someone in leadership. But no, just the metallic click of my badge failing at the glass doors and the tight smile of the security guard who couldn't meet my eyes. I walked out carrying one box, mostly personal, mostly useless, because they'd already locked me out of the server by the time I made it to the elevator. They'd wiped everything. Email, gone. Drive access, revoked. Shared folders, dead zones. Years of compliance workflows I'd built from scratch. Deleted by someone in IT who didn't know what half those acronyms meant. It felt surgical, not personal. Darren wanted me scrubbed, not just gone. Clean slate for the new regime. And I gave it to him. I didn't send a goodbye message, didn't post on Slack, let them wonder if I'd been escorted out or vanished on my own terms. People notice silence more than a speech anyway. The only thing I took, besides the box, was the agency binder I'd kept in my desk, the one Darren had never noticed because he never looked past a headline. Inside were copies of every memo I'd ever submitted as liaison, every update, every annotated draft of the infrastructure packet we were about to submit for approval. That binder had my initials in red ink on every page, and the agency's watermark on the back of each one. It was never his to touch. I made tea when I got home, the kind you forget you have until you really need it, jasmine, from a tin that still smelled like calm. I stood in the kitchen with the blinds half closed and waited for the ache to hit. It didn't. Just an eerie, steady quiet, like the moment before a siren wails or a tornado touches down. Not relief, just stillness. The phone rang just after 6. Caller ID said DC, no name. That was new. Miss Cordell? A familiar voice, smooth, a little weathered. This is Stephen Warren. I'm reaching out as a courtesy, unofficially. He was the assistant director of regulatory coordination. We'd shared coffee once during a particularly chaotic cross-agency audit. He wore suits that never wrinkled and spoke like every syllable had been vetted by a lawyer. I heard about the development at Grayson. I wanted to reach out before tomorrow's meeting. Of course they already knew. They knew I'd been fired, knew Darren hadn't notified the agency, knew that the only person officially listed in the hearing docket as their point of contact was now sipping jasmine tea in socked feet, surrounded by moving boxes and a career's worth of ghost files. I'm assuming this wasn't your decision, Stephen said, voice careful, which is unfortunate given the sequence of events. Sequence of events. That was their code for you lit the match, but don't act surprised by the fire. I didn't respond right away. Just let the silence stretch, controlled. We'll likely need to issue a pause, he added, due to changes in representation. Our review depends heavily on continuity. There it was. Continuity, that sacred bureaucratic word. I was listed in 4 different appendices as the sole external continuity advisor on the project. Grayson had leaned on my designation for 2 full budget cycles. Hell, I'd been the one who rewrote their risk framework in accordance with post-Title IV standards, and Darren had just unplugged the power source without checking the fuse box. Stephen hesitated before continuing. I'm letting you know out of respect, not obligation. Your record stands. This wasn't a performance issue. Translation. We know what you did for them, and we're not blind to what just happened. I thanked him formally, didn't offer to help, didn't suggest a next step. The setup was no longer mine to control. That evening, I took the binder out and laid it on the coffee table like a war map. The approval process was built on layers of dependencies, budgetary sign-offs, environmental assessments, cross-agency signatory clauses. Every layer touched my name. And now it was all suspended mid-air with no hands holding it up. I didn't feel triumphant, not yet. That would come later, after the second wave of calls, after the boardroom turned quiet, after the investors started whispering. Right now, all I felt was stillness. The kind that settles when you've pulled the pin but haven't heard the boom. Darren liked to surround himself with mirrors. Not literal ones, though I wouldn't put it past him. The man ironed his shirt collars before Zoom calls. No, his were made of people. Polished, deferential, full of "great point, Darren," and "you're really modernizing the place." He'd cleared out half the C-suite within his first 60 days and installed a squadron of ex-hedge fund sycophants who wouldn't know a federal docket if it slapped them across their subscription-only coffee orders. So when his phone buzzed that night, mid-dinner, mid-toast, mid-back-patting himself for his decisive leadership, he didn't hesitate. He answered on speaker. "Darren Luss," he said, smooth and sharp. There was a pause. Then a voice, even smoother, clipped, precise, and loaded with more institutional power than any of them realized. "Mr. Lusk, this is Director Fallon, Office of Federal Infrastructure Review." The room went still. Darren sat up straighter, smile half frozen. Of course, Director. Good to hear from you. I'll be brief, Fallon said, not unkindly. I was informed this evening that you terminated Maren Cordell's employment. Darren blinked. Correct. She was found to be working in an external capacity, without proper clearance. A pause. Not long, but long enough. Interesting, Fallon said slowly. Considering Ms. Cordell was the officially designated lead external advisor on your $5.1 billion infrastructure petition, scheduled for final approval review in less than 48 hours. Someone in the room coughed, one of Darren's new VPs, probably the guy who thought regulatory filings were things interns could Google. Fallon continued, tone now hard as policy steel. That designation was approved by this office. You just removed your own compliance cornerstone, without notice, on the eve of hearing. Darren didn't speak. The color had drained from his face like someone opened a valve behind his smugness. No one else in the room understood it yet. Not fully. Not the significance of continuity language in a federal submission. Not the fact that removing an advisor, especially one tied to risk continuity and cross-agency liaisons, wasn't just a PR hiccup. It was a procedural fracture, one that could legally suspend their entire approval window. You'll receive an official communication by morning, Fallon added, calm but final. In the meantime, I suggest reviewing your internal compliance structure, thoroughly. Click. That was it. Darren stared at the phone for a few seconds, like he expected it to apologize. His jaw moved once, twice, no sound. Then, true to form, he pivoted. It's fine, he muttered. We'll fix it. It's just semantics. But someone, one of the quieter board liaisons in the corner, spoke up, hesitant. She was the continuity officer, wasn't she? Appendix B4? Silence again. Real silence this time. Not awkward, not tense, dead. Because now it was real. That meant every section that referenced me, technical memos, regulatory notes, the adjusted risk worksheet, was potentially compromised. Null. Or worse, flagged for re-review. And any re-review meant delay. Any delay meant questions. And questions in this market meant money bleeding out through the seams. I wasn't there. But I didn't need to be. I had a friend in legal who texted me just 2 words. He froze. That night, I sat by the window in my living room, lights off, watching the neighbor's dog chase moths. My phone stayed quiet. I didn't check LinkedIn. I didn't open Slack. I didn't even look at the agency email I still had soft access to through my private channel. Instead, I opened a bottle of red I'd been saving for a good reason. This seemed close enough. And when the first call came in from an unfamiliar number, Grayson's interim counsel probably, I let it ring. The second was from one of the junior analysts. I muted it. The third, Darren's direct line. That one I watched until it stopped vibrating. He'd finally heard the truth. Not from me, but from the one room he couldn't bluff or budget his way out of. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. But somewhere deep beneath the stillness, a flicker of satisfaction twisted like a match in dry leaves. Not because I'd won. Not yet. But because Darren Lusk had just learned that silence has teeth. The word pause sounds harmless. Almost gentle. A breath, a beat, a brief intermission in a very expensive play. But in federal infrastructure, pause is a 4-letter bomb, especially when it shows up in an official memo from the Office of Federal Infrastructure Review at 8:17 a.m., CCing senior counsel, compliance leads, and every single agency liaison that matters. Especially when it contains the phrase pending clarification of external advisory continuity in the subject line. That one line gutted Grayson Infrastructure Holdings before the coffee was brewed. They didn't even know what hit them, not at first. Internally, the war room lit up like Christmas in a blender. Darren tried to spin it as a clerical hiccup, some brief administrative hold while the agency caught up with leadership changes. But legal wasn't fooled. Neither was finance. And by noon, Darren's own executive admin was whispering things like, "Do we have a backup liaison on file? And can we reverse a personnel decision retroactively?" They were scrambling, but they weren't fast, because they couldn't be. There was no backup. I hadn't just been a name on a form. I was the form, the footnote, the cross-reference, the continuity clause embedded in 6 separate filings. They needed someone with federal clearance, environmental risk certification, and 3 years of prior agency-facing compliance. Minimum. But Darren had cleared house when he took over. Most of the old hands were long gone or too shell-shocked to step forward. They floated the junior compliance analyst for a moment. young, eager, overconfident. She'd shadowed me for 2 months last year. Thought that made her qualified. She submitted a memo offering to step in. The agency didn't even respond. Meanwhile, I was having coffee in a quiet corner booth 3 blocks from Union Station, sitting across from a general counsel at a competitor firm. Not Grayson's biggest rival, not yet, but close. He looked me over like a man considering whether to buy the last life vest on a sinking ship. "I heard you're available," he said, cutting to the point. I didn't smile. "I'm listening." That was the tone for the next 48 hours. My inbox, private, encrypted, started filling with soft inquiries. Not job offers, not outright poaching, just questions. "Are you taking new clients? Would you be open to a limited engagement under advisory terms? Do you have capacity for pre-review compliance consulting?" All of them careful not to say, "We saw what you did," but still very much implying, "We saw what you did." Grayson kept calling. Different numbers, different people, different tactics. One message came through the secretary of a partner at a law firm I once helped navigate a licensing debacle. "Marin, they're asking if you'd consider a conversation. Off record. No pressure." I didn't respond, because the pressure wasn't mine anymore. Let them feel the vacuum. Let them sit in meetings where no one knows how to answer the agency's compliance matrix. Let them reread my past reports and realize how many of the footnotes were coded references to shifting regulatory winds only I'd known how to track. Let Darren stare at the frozen hearing date on the wall calendar and watch the silence get heavier every hour. They'd thought they could replace knowledge with image. Thought experience could be outsourced or condensed into bullet points on a resume. Now they were realizing that continuity isn't a buzzword, it's a person. It was me. That evening, the board tried to reach me through an intermediary. Not directly, of course. Still playing politics, still hoping I might consider stepping in to assist the transition. They didn't say return, just assist. I didn't say no, I said nothing. Because quiet, when used right, becomes power. And for the first time in years, I could feel mine filling the space I used to stand in. Not with noise, not with revenge, just absence. Cold, strategic, undeniable absence. The kind that makes people finally look around and ask, who let this happen? And more importantly, how do we fix it now that she's gone? It started with a form letter. Regulatory request for clarification, Level 2 audit scope expansion. Sent via secure channel from the agency to Grayson's compliance inbox. Time-stamped 9:12 a.m., flagged urgent, with one devastating paragraph at the top. In light of changes to listed external advisory personnel, please provide all previously submitted documentation relevant to the 5.1b approval hearing, along with internal preparatory notes, risk matrices, liaison memos, and advisory interpretations used in construction of submission appendices AF. Translation: show your work, every layer, every draft, every cross-reference justification that led to those forms. The problem? I was the one who built the scaffolding. They'd removed me, and now they had no map. The junior analyst, Claire, I think her name was the first to panic. I remember her from a few training sessions. Smart, diligent, too new to understand how deep this mess ran. She opened the shared drive, expecting a neat folder labeled Approval Docs, Final. What she found instead was a scattering of PDFs, misnamed Word files, and a handful of spreadsheets so deeply dependent on my internal formula structures that they returned REF/error the moment she tried to open them without the macros I'd stored in a private system key. She messaged IT. They couldn't help. My access had been wiped at the executive level. Darren wanted me gone, and IT had obliged. By noon, Claire was whispering to one of the mid-tier compliance officers in the hallway outside the war room. I think we might lose the entire window. Because that's how the agency works. They don't reopen hearings. They revoke application windows. Start over. From scratch. New fees, new timelines, new approvals, and worse, reputation loss, investor suspicion, media speculation, and all of that was spiraling through Grayson's sleek, glass-walled office like a silent storm no one could outrun. I wasn't watching. I didn't have to. I was on a train headed north, laptop open, quietly finalizing an onboarding agreement for a new advisory client, not technically a competitor, yet. But they were circling a similar infrastructure approval in the next fiscal quarter, and they'd heard about my sudden availability through a former agency contact. They didn't ask what happened at Grayson. They didn't need to. All they wanted to know was how soon I could begin and if I'd be willing to review their continuity documentation before submission. I told them I'd sleep on it, and I meant it. Back in DC, Grayson's internal counsel was going nuclear, pulling old records, calling retired team members, trying to reconstruct the breadcrumb trail I'd laid across 4 years of shifting regulatory frameworks, environmental impact pivots, budgetary recalibrations. But it wasn't a trail, it was a living map. One that only worked if you knew which symbols meant watch for upcoming rule changes, or language used here deviates from precedent, needs buffer clause. They didn't know. They hadn't asked. They'd never thought to understand how I built things, only that the things got built. A partner at their external law firm called me that evening, not directly, of course, through an old mutual friend who happened to still have my personal number. "She's just asking if you'd be willing to verify the last round of filings," my friend said. Off the record, quietly, no names, no paper trail. I told her I was unavailable, politely, firmly. Then I turned my phone off. I wasn't unreachable because I was petty. I was unreachable because I had decided to be. Because silence wasn't avoidance anymore. It was discipline. Precision. Let them feel the full cost of forgetting where the knowledge lives. Let them scramble, sweating over printouts with half-legible margin notes, trying to guess which paragraph had been flagged for risk language by the agency 3 months ago. Let them wonder whether I'd ever answer again. I sipped coffee in the quiet of my train compartment, the rhythm of the tracks a perfect metronome for calm. Not vindictive, not angry, just resolved. They had made their move. Now they were living in its consequences. Darren was never more dangerous than when he was cornered with a Bluetooth headset and a half-baked lie. By 8:45 the next morning, he'd scheduled an urgent transparency call with Grayson's top investors. Calendar invites went out fast. Too fast. His new PR consultant, some Harvard MBA with a name like Chase or Griffin, had clearly written the talking points. Everything in the prep notes was manicured within an inch of its life. Opportunity to reframe, emphasize modernization, highlight procedural strength, neutralize perceived instability. Translation: stall, charm, and distract until the money stops shaking. By 9 a.m., the call was live. "Good morning, everyone," Darren said, smooth as stage glass. "I appreciate you making time on short notice. I want to address the recent regulatory pause head on." He paused, deliberately, probably to give the illusion of control. I could picture him pacing in his office, sleeves rolled up just enough to say I'm relaxed but powerful, clutching a coffee cup he wouldn't drink from. "As some of you may be aware," he continued, "the agency has requested a minor procedural recalibration as part of their review cadence. This is a standard checkpoint in infrastructure projects of this scale." I nearly choked on my tea. Recalibration. He made it sound like someone had dropped a decimal point, not detonated a foundational compliance relationship. But that's Darren's gift. He thinks words are weapons, and that if you say them with enough corporate polish, they'll rewrite the truth itself. What he didn't know, or maybe didn't believe, was that the agency had its own press team, and they'd been watching. By 10:12 a.m., less than an hour after his call wrapped, a quiet 4-sentence statement appeared on the Office of Federal Infrastructure Review's website under Active Hearings, Status Adjustments. Hearing review for Grayson Infrastructure Holdings has been paused. Due to the removal of an approved external liaison and primary continuity advisor, timeline may adjust following reassignment or requalification of submission pathways. Additional details forthcoming. No further comments at this time. That was all it took. The market didn't care how Darren spun it. The market saw a federal agency using the words removal and adjust in the same breath as a $5.1 billion approval hearing, which meant risk, which meant exposure, which meant sell. The first shareholder to blink was a private fund out of Minneapolis. They pulled their secondary tranche commitment before noon. 2 others followed, smaller but still noticeable. By 2 p.m., Grayson's investor relations inbox was hemorrhaging questions that started with, "Can you clarify?" and ended with, "Are we still compliant?" And somewhere between all that panic, the board began to stir. Not openly, not yet. But I heard through a former colleague that Director Nguyen requested a private meeting with legal, that two of the outside board members had started comparing notes on who exactly had authorized my termination without pre-clearance. Someone else texted me a screenshot from the Slack rumor mill. Darren had privately floated the idea that I had misrepresented my agency relationship. That one made me laugh, because the agency had already released a public letter 2 months ago with my name on it, as the approved continuity advisor. Darren was spinning so hard he'd come untethered from the facts. Still, I didn't speak, no statement, no tweet, no exclusive leak to the press. I stayed exactly where I was. Unreadable, unreachable, unbothered, because that's the thing with power. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it just stops returning your calls. I wasn't even in DC anymore. I was on site with a new client in Richmond, quietly walking their legal team through a regulatory pre-checklist for an upcoming waterway project. We reviewed clause language, ran mock audits, flagged 3 minor inconsistencies in their flood impact studies, all before lunch. They paid me by wire transfer before I'd even boarded the train home. And Grayson? They were hemorrhaging calm. Darren kept hosting calls, each one more jittery than the last, while the board began cataloging every decision he'd made since January, including the one where he'd fired the woman whose name was on the only continuity clause the agency still respected. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. But I did close my laptop a little softer that night. Not triumphant, just vindicated. They had fired their bridge, and now they were watching the river rise. They thought I'd come crawling back. That's what the offer said, even if the email tried to pretend otherwise. It came through a neutral account, legal@Grayson.infra, calm, with a bland subject line that belied its desperation. Exploratory opportunity discussion. Inside, 3 paragraphs of soft language dressed in legal starch. In light of recent adjustments to your availability, a mutual opportunity to stabilize pending filings. We propose a limited advisory capacity to support documentation continuity during the temporary transition. Translation. We blew a hole in the hull and realized too late the patch kit was wearing heels and now works across the street. No formal reinstatement, no admission of fault, just a temporary, neutered version of the job I'd built from scratch, now stripped of authority, buried under NDAs, and leashed to the same executives who had tossed me without a second thought. I didn't reply. The next day, a partner from one of their external firms called my new office line. This one skipped the formality. They're asking what it'll take to get you back, even just for the hearing. Name your rate. I paused long enough for the silence to sting. Then, there's nothing left to buy. Because this wasn't about money anymore. It was about the principle, the precedent. If I went back now, even at triple the rate, even if they groveled, it would say the damage could be undone. That erasure was reversible. That competence was conditional. And I was done being conditional. Grayson didn't understand that yet. But they were about to, because just after noon, word started to spread, quietly at first, then like wildfire through every Slack channel and investor WhatsApp thread, that I'd officially signed with Norstead, Grayson's primary infrastructure competitor. Same federal lane, same agency review committee, slightly smaller in scale until now. Norstead had kept their filings light for months, deliberately waiting out Grayson's heavyweight pitch. But the second the agency hit pause and my name went dark on Grayson's forms, Norstead moved like a chess master in the final 3 moves. They approached me through a private back channel 3 days after I was fired. No pomp, no vague offers, just a 1-line email. Marin, our door is open if you'd like to lead us through the storm they created. I walked in without hesitation. They didn't ask me to fix their image. They asked me to guide their compliance structure, document integrity, and agency language, using the exact same playbook Grayson had thrown in the shredder the day I left. By the time Grayson's general counsel figured out what had happened, the ink on my Norstead engagement was dry, and the news had leaked. The board was stunned. A few directors issued clarification memos to stakeholders, trying to spin it as a non-exclusive collaboration. But everyone knew what it meant. The person who had built Grayson's regulatory credibility had just moved into the competitor's war room, with agency approval. Darren panicked. He called me himself. Blocked number. 7:41 p.m. I stared at the screen and for a moment considered letting it ring out, but curiosity won. "Marin," he said, like he was still the boss of something. "You knew this would happen." His voice was strained, like the oxygen had been thin all day and he was just now realizing the altitude. I gave you one sentence, I said flatly. You chose not to hear it. He tried to pivot. We can still make this right. No, Darren, I said calmly. You can't. You fired your continuity. Click. I forwarded the call transcript to the agency for their records, not as a warning, just as a courtesy, a final footnote to a chapter he never understood he was writing. That night, I slept soundly, not triumphant, not smug, just solid, anchored. They'd built a house on my foundation, set fire to it for optics, and now stood shocked that it burned. I had no interest in rebuilding with ashes. The reckoning didn't come with fire. It came with a silent calendar invite. Subject: Executive Session Board Review. No agenda, no attachments, just a time, a link, and a location that Darren Lusk couldn't talk his way out of. The board met behind closed doors for 91 minutes. No Darren, no legal, just 9 people with sinking stock forecasts, nervous investors, and a pile of printed agency statements they didn't want to read out loud. One of them, a woman I'd once trained during an early compliance refresh years ago, opened the meeting by reading from Appendix B4. She quoted my name verbatim, then she asked the room a single question. Why did no one realize she was the foundation? No one had an answer, because no one had bothered to ask the question while there was still time. When the door opened, Darren was summoned. Briefly. Someone said he was calm at first. Arrogant, even. He blamed legacy processes, untracked shadow workflows, over-reliance on a single advisor. Classic Darren. Never wrong, just a victim of someone else's clarity. But the board had moved beyond words. They wanted numbers, they wanted loss calculations, delay estimates, reputation damage forecasts, and most of all, they wanted names on the paperwork. So they gave him one last choice: resign or be removed by formal vote. He blinked, laughed, I'm told, then saw the vote sheet already printed. He walked. His final act? An email, one line, no greeting, no subject. You knew this would happen. I stared at it for a full minute, not because it hurt, not because it shocked me, but because it confirmed everything I already knew. He never understood the difference between control and competence, never understood that knowing isn't the same as listening, and leading isn't the same as owning. He thought this was all some chess match. He never realized he wasn't even on the board. I didn't reply. I forwarded the message to Director Fallon at the agency, just for the file, a quiet log, a time-stamped artifact of hubris. There was no need for commentary. The sentence spoke for itself. That same afternoon, Norstead finalized its submission. The new compliance dossier included my redlined continuity maps, fresh appendices, and a full procedural log referencing every change made post-handoff. The agency's office confirmed receipt within 2 hours. Darren's name, meanwhile, was scrubbed from the Grayson website by morning. The board released a brief statement. Leadership changes enacted in light of shifting regulatory needs. No mention of me, no apology, didn't matter, because quietly, behind the scenes, their outside counsel had reached out again. Not to me, this time to Norstead's legal liaison, looking for a timeline, a status update, some glimpse of how fast we were moving. The answer was simple: fast enough to leave them behind. I sat in my apartment that night, phone face down, inbox quiet. No headlines, no breaking news alerts, just the calm of cold triumph. The stillness of a fire put out, and the ashes swept clean by someone who didn't need to watch it burn. Darren had thought he'd silenced a liability. Instead, he'd awakened the one voice he couldn't unhear by removing it. And now, the only sound left at Grayson was the echo of doors closing behind him. The hearing room smelled the same: sterile carpet, overworked HVAC, and government-issue coffee brewed 2 hours too long. But everything else had changed. The guard at the desk didn't recognize me, but the badge printer did. My name slid onto the plastic tag cleanly, without hesitation. Myron Cordell, External Liaison, Norstead Group. No more footnotes. No more conditional phrases. Just the name and the seat and the full weight of the role returned to my hands. Only now for someone who understood its value. I walked past the same blue-carpeted hallway I'd walked for over a decade under Grayson's banner. Same dull lights, same cracked ceiling tile above the double doors. But this time, the silence around me wasn't suffocating. It was reverent. Inside, the hearing committee sat in formation. 5 officials, 2 aides, 1 stenographer, and Director Fallon, positioned like a calm center of gravity, nodded once as I entered. "Marin," he said, standing. Then, with a quiet smile, Let's begin. He handed me the hearing folder, the one I used to build in the background while someone else sat in the spotlight. Now it was mine, with Norsted's name printed on the top in clean, centered text. A binder full of my work, my language, my continuity framework. No Darren, no Grayson logo in sight. But they were coming. I took my seat at the front, just as the doors opened behind me and a ripple of movement passed through the room. 2 men in dark suits, 1 woman in a navy dress. Grayson's fallback team, replacement liaison, replacement legal, a temporary compliance advisor who'd been brought in from a consultancy I'd flagged as insufficient 2 years ago. They sat in the gallery, second row, and then it happened. One of the aides leaned into Fallon's ear, whispered something. Fallon nodded, opened a separate folder, and cleared his throat. We will proceed in docket order. First up, Norsted Group, application number 1432B. He paused. Then, without looking at the others, he added, Grayson Infrastructure Holdings, application 1498Z, is currently pending continuity verification. They will be reviewed only if time permits. That sentence hit like a church bell in a funeral home. Bottom of the waiting list. No priority, no promises. I didn't turn around. Didn't need to. The silence behind me said everything. Grayson's delegation was frozen. A room that once rose when they entered now moved past them like furniture. I opened the Norsted packet, page 1, risk assessment, environmental impact log, cross-agency memoranda with all updated signatures. I had built it quietly. Brick by brick, Fallon leaned slightly forward. Ms. Cordell, are you prepared to walk us through? I am. And I was. Every word, every chart, every clause, mine. No guesswork, no substitutions, no rush jobs wrapped in jargon. Just clean infrastructure. Documented, defensible, complete. We moved through the first section like water over polished stone. No questions, just nods. The kind that meant, this is what we've been waiting for. A process not just followed, but respected. Behind me, Grayson's team didn't move once. Their fate was no longer in the room. It was in the silence of being dismissed, replaced, forgotten. At the 2-hour mark, Fallon called for a recess. I stepped into the hallway, unhurried, calm. My phone buzzed. A short message from Norsted's general counsel. Well done. Agency just confirmed preferred track status. Another ping, this time from a reporter I knew well. Sources say Grayson lost a second investor. Any comment? I didn't answer, because I didn't need to. I walked back into the hearing room and took my seat, not the shadowed chair behind someone else's power, but the lead. Mine now. Grayson's name would appear again, maybe, but only when the dust settled, and by then, the table would be fully turned, permanently.